So Nick Park, you returned to feature animation directing with the film Early Man. It's your first feature film since Wallace and Gromit: The Curse of the Were-Rabbit back in 2005, for which you won the Academy Award. First of all, why did you make us wait so long for another one of your movies?
Well, it's funny. I wasn't really aware of the time going by. To be honest with you, I guess because I was involved, as I was helping and consulting on different projects, and like Shaun the Sheep, the first movie, and there were little Wallace and Gromit projects which I was semi-involved with. The time and I was in development with this for quite a long time. Yeah, I wasn't that aware of the time slipping by.
I guess time flies for us more so than us fans who are waiting. Well, tell us a little bit about Early Man. Where did the idea for this movie come from?
Yeah, well, most of these ideas, they come from sketchbooks, and I just doodle all the time. And an example being with Chicken Run. It started with a little sketch of a chicken. My sister and I had chickens and the family, and we kept thinking of ideas, and I just drew this little sketch of a chicken digging its way out of a chicken coop, and that was it, The Great Escape with Chickens. With this, I've always been attracted to cavemen and women, and I guess partly I feel that the medium, that the kind of primitive nature, the earthiness of the clay, and the texture of the figures, I feel lends itself to primitive people, and I saw lots of potential, with the eyebrow and the stupidity of cavemen. But it wasn't just a caveman, it's been done before. I wanted something that was a bit different and a little bit quirky, and had this idea that what if cavemen invented sport? What if, and there is this idea in the UK that the Brits invented soccer, and I'm very proud of it. And it was the tribal nature of it all, and of football or soccer today, especially in Europe, it's very, very tribal. And it seemed to lend itself. And so it was like, I used to pitch it as it's caveman and football, it's Early Man United, which is funny in the UK. and, but Man United is a massive brand, and I don't think we could go near using that really. We used it as a joke at one point, but yeah, it was really the fact that I hadn't seen a prehistoric underdog sports movie before, and that kind of attracted me to the idea.
So I mean, you're one of the few people, you and your studio, who still works in stop motion animation. Most animated films now are made in a computer. Can you talk a bit about why you guys continue to work within this specific animation medium?
Yeah, well, Peter Lord and David Sproxton, who set the company up, they started in stop motion, and particularly in clay in stop motion, but they've always been in favour of diversifying the company and employing, keeping abreast of technology and state of the art and everything. And personally, I've always had a love for the clay side of things, while the rest of the company is diverse. And I always feel I'm a clayman myself, and I just love it because I feel like there's a certain, it's not just the technique. I mean, it's, people say, mate, it's more about the story. It doesn't matter about what technique. I think that's true on one level, definitely true. But I think there's something that comes out of the actual technique for me. There's a charm and there's something. I mean, for example, in Early Man, I was very keen to keep the fur textures, and a lot of animators would run in fear at the idea of having fur that might wobble and vibrate, because you have to touch the figures, and it might boil. For me, that's a charm, really, that goes with the territory, and it reminds me of those Willis O'Brien films, and King Kong and Ray Harryhausen, Mighty Joe Young, but I mean, as far as Aardman goes, I think we will always keep a hand in the stop motion, definitely, even if things move on in other ways in the company.
Well, thankfully, there's a lot of people who are like yourself, keeping the format alive. We see movies from Leica, people like Henry Selick. So, thankfully, there's still people. Same thing with 2D animation as well, traditional hand drawn. There's still people who are keeping those mediums alive, thankfully.
Yes, yes, and even though I feel very much an advocate for the stop motion side, we do embrace the technology. Even in Early Man and in Curse of the Were-Rabbit, we use digital technology. We shoot on digital cameras now. Uh, you know, uh, Digital like Canon stills cameras instead of the old 35mm film cameras. It offers far more flexibility. We can, we tried, in this film, we wanted to keep everything looking quite kind of, physical and real, even lots of special effects as well. But we did, sometimes we just didn't have the studio space. So we built sets as far as we could, and then we would green screen the background and put skies in later, or the distant mountains in later, or it was lots of volcanoes and explosions and stuff, and that's quite hard to do in plasticine.
How does that help you in terms of, because you guys, you have to build an entire world here. So how does that kind of technology help you in your general world building?
Yeah, well, it's useful because obviously clay and stop motion can have its limits depending on what the ideas are, and I usually like to, in a way, the limits are they also act as a kind of a good, you can turn that into a good thing, and that it helps to discipline you and help guide the idea and how you execute it, and can add a kind of humor to it as well because of the limitations, uh, to keep things kind of simple. But for a few films now, we employ uh, we employ the CG or the digital effects just like any movie would for creating fog or skies or fire or water. Although some of that we try to keep actually with stop motion, but yeah, I mean, in this film, there was also another big problem in that we had a football stadium full of people, and it would be quite expensive to make all those 10,000 puppets all movable and with armatures and everything. So the digital guys stepped in and replicated the puppets in the stadium, and but we, in a funny way, we were quite. It gets really expensive to go digital, so we were limited with what we could afford. Actually, we had a limit really on how we had to keep the digital crowd out of focus because we couldn't really afford the rendering of a CG film. So we could only do it if it was out of focus, because then you couldn't see that it was done, more cheaply.
Does that do those sort of financial limitations, do they help you in a way creatively, like in some of the decisions that you make?
I think it does, because in the stadium it would be easy to get distracted by all the detail in the background. It helped us focus on the main characters who were in the foreground, and we tried to keep all the main characters in stop motion and in clay as far as we could. Yeah, so it does. It helps the storytelling, and in a way, the football matches in the film were a big challenge. I had this idea that it would be. I wanted them very big and visceral and atmospheric, but also comedic, and that it needed to tell story, and cinematic too. So I wanted to keep the camera down with the characters, which helped knock the crowd back out of focus. So that we focused really on the story and the main characters.
I wanted to, speaking of the characters, I just wanted to ask you a bit about the voice cast. You've got people like Eddie Redmayne and Tom Hiddleston, Maisie Williams, Timothy Spall, just to name a few. Can you talk about the importance of finding the right voice actor to, give life to these little clay creatures?
Yes, yes. I mean, voices. Obviously, voices for our characters have always been key at Aardman. Um, as most animators would probably agree with that. And finding the right person, I was so thrilled with the cast, to have such an amazing cast, and they were so lovely and professional to work with. Eddie, I thought, was a perfect Doug here, and you feel. you feel bad asking such great actors to test for you, but they're very willing to come in and try stuff out. Eddie immediately asked me how old is Doug, and I said he's probably about 15, and I'm after quite a sort of dishevelled, kind of not very confident but enthusiastic Doug, and so he immediately went in to see him transform into this 15-year-old was amazing. And the same with all the actors, Tom Hiddleston, Maisie Williams, Timothy Spall, and a whole range of my favourite actors and comedians that appear in the film. Rob Brydon.
Yeah. Take us through a little bit of, if you will. I mean, this is a 90-minute film, about 87 minutes minus credits. Take us through, if you will, just a bit of the process of filming a scene of one of these things, because it's still a very kind of long and arduous process that you guys have to go through just to get a couple of seconds of film.
Yeah, it is. I mean, from the idea stage right through to the end is probably 5 years, 4 or 5 years. And as I say, it starts with sketches, and I work with a writer. I work with two or three different writers at different stages, but mainly Mark Burton, who I'd worked with on Chicken Run and Curse of the Were Rabbit. And a lot of the writing is actually not writing. It's sitting in a room, it's sketching, it's putting storyboards up and looking at postcards, trying to figure out the plot points and the ideas. And then you write drafts, and then you find out things aren't quite right. So you get notes back and you go back to cards, and that goes on for a couple of years. And then when we start to get happy enough, we start storyboarding. And then that's where the visual filmmaking side starts to take more solidity. And we put the storyboards into the edit machine. So we have a story reel, and we put scratch voices on and scratch music and see how the whole thing's shaping up, how the gags are working. We show that to the crew or whoever, get notes back. We get so it's a long process before we even start filming. And meanwhile, all the models, we're designing the characters and the sets, and we finally, when certain scenes we start to get happy and those scenes get locked off, we start to shoot those scenes. Nothing's in order, we shoot in all sort, different scenes at different times. Certain even scenes we're shooting, we may suddenly realize something's not really working, so we rewrite and maybe we have to record with the actors before we shoot the animation, so to get the lip sync more good. And then we may have a rewrite and have to go back to the actors and re-record the scene. So it's a very fluid, and there's lots of improvisation. Actually, people don't realize it with stop motion, but there is.
Well, you came to prominence with a series of shorts, including, Wallace and Gromit, which was a favorite of mine as a child. To have created something that has lasted as long as it did, and I mean, you won a couple of Academy Awards off of that. What does that mean for you to have created something like that?
Oh yeah, I mean, I have to pinch myself really. I'm constantly getting people coming up to me and saying, I grew up with Wallace and Gromit, and you got me into animation in the first place. And that's such a thrill, just to hear that. It also shocks me because I keep thinking it was yesterday, and there's whole generations now who've grown up with it. But it's lovely to have a couple of characters that are so well known. I think that was my dream when I was a kid, to create characters, and so that's very satisfying. But it's lovely to have characters that seem to exist outside of the films. I think that's the key to creating good characters, that they have a life outside, and the film is just we're just privy to an adventure they had. I don't know how I hit it, but it kind of evolved in a way and started at college with Wallace and Gromit. So it's been a really good story. I'm feeling unbelievably fortunate.
A lot of people now are also growing up with Chicken Run, which was your first feature-length animated film. I wonder, I mean, can you talk a bit about transitioning from, you'd made these shorts, the transition into feature filmmaking with that one?
Yeah, that was a big step for us. It's partly why one of the reasons we did Chicken Run, we felt, stepping up, because it was a massive step for us as a production house. We felt that it was maybe a bit risky to do a Wallace and Gromit feature, although that was talked about. So we thought and also Pete Lord and myself wanted to co-direct. So we thought we'd get an idea that we can both like work up together and own it ourselves. And that, again, it started with just this idea of it's just this sketch of a chicken digging its way out of a cube, and it was The Great Escape with Chickens. That's how we pitched it to DreamWorks and Steven Spielberg and Jeffrey Katzenberg, and it went down very well. And we so enjoyed that film, and it was a really steep learning curve for us because we hadn't made feature films before. DreamWorks and had a lot to kind of bring to the table to help us. It took this. I mean, it was suddenly to, a lot of the animation industry is a kind of cottage industry, and so it was kind of how to up that to industrial scale, but while keeping the sense that it's all handmade. In some ways, looking at the animation, animators and model makers being so professional, they have a tendency to want to smooth things, and we were a little bit afraid that our thummy, fingerprinty technique might not look good on the big screen. And not many stop motion films have been made. There's only Nightmare Before Christmas was the greatest example, and we were scared that our technique might look a bit jerky and a bit rough, but it didn't. We were encouraged by our testing that we did, and so we pulled back again, and started to get more freer and more ourselves, play chickens.
You've won 4 Academy Awards, both for shorts and for features. What has that recognition meant for you?
Oh boy, well, it's certainly. I mean, in a way, I don't think about it on a day-to-day basis, but I don't wake up in the morning with them back.
I just hope not.
But it's certainly nice to have under your belt, and I don't have to dream of it, which is a nice freedom to have.
Yeah.
To have that there, is nice to fall back on. They're nice. It's nice. They're in the studio. I don't have them in any like special funny place. I just kind of we have them in the studio because I feel like everybody, the whole studio won those awards.
Yeah, absolutely. Nick Park, thank you so much for your time. Congratulations on the film. It was a real pleasure talking to you.
Pleasure to talk, Zach. Thanks.
You're welcome.